The deep silence of space was broken only by the soft hum of the engines as Captain Marcus Drake and his crew of explorers drifted through the uncharted sector. They had been traveling for months, following a faint signal that no one else had dared to investigate. The ship, a small, nimble vessel named Odyssey, had seen better days, but it was reliable. Drake glanced at the navigation screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. The signal was growing stronger, but there was something odd about it, like it was pulling them towards something they couldn't yet understand. "Captain, the signal's coming from that direction." Lieutenant Sarah Mason pointed to a patch of space ahead. Her voice was steady, but Drake could sense the tension in her words. Something about this felt off, but they had already come this far. Curiosity was a dangerous thing in space, but it was also what pushed humanity to explore the unknown. "Set a course, Lieutenant," Drake commanded, his voice firm. He could feel the pull in his gut, the sense that they were on the verge of something monumental, something that could change the fate of humanity forever. The Odyssey shifted course and headed toward the mysterious signal, passing through the dense nebula. The stars around them seemed to dim, swallowed by the strange cosmic dust that filled the space dot as they got closer. A massive structure appeared on the scanners, a warship, buried deep within the nebula. The ship was enormous, far larger than anything humanity had ever built. It was unlike anything Drake had seen, its design too complex, too ancient, to belong to any known species. Its surface was covered in strange markings that glowed faintly, a language no one could decipher. "Is this ... a relic?" Mason asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she stared at the screen in awe. She wasn't sure whether to feel fear or excitement, but the enormity of what they had just discovered was overwhelming. "I don't know," Drake replied, his voice steady despite the growing sense of dread creeping in. "But we're going to find out." The Odyssey slowly approached the mysterious ship. The closer they got, the more surreal the scene became. There were no signs of life, no energy readings from the ship's interior. It was like a ghost ship, floating in the dark void. Yet, there was an undeniable sense that this place was not abandoned. It was waiting for something, or someone. "Activate the scanning equipment," Drake ordered. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Mason worked quickly, her fingers dancing over the console. The scanners came to life, and a flood of data filled the screen. There were anomalies, energy signatures that shouldn't be there, a faint pulse emanating from deep inside the ship. It was as if the warship was alive, or at least not entirely dormant. "Captain, you need to see this," Mason said, her voice shaky. "There's a power source ... at inside. It's massive. And it's active." She looked at Drake with wide eyes, unsure of what to make of it. "But it doesn't match any known technology." Drake's heart skipped a beat. There was something eerily familiar about the ship, but he couldn't place it. He had seen similar designs in ancient human texts, legends of a long-lost civilization. But how could this be real? How could it still be functioning after all these centuries? "We need to board," Drake said, his mind racing. "Prepare the boarding team." The Odyssey was equipped with a small shuttle for close-range exploration. And soon, Drake and his team were suited up, ready to board the ship. The atmosphere was tense as they approached the massive vessel, their shuttle's engines barely making a sound as they drifted into position. The surface of the warship was cold, dark, and smooth, like the surface of an ancient stone monument. It felt wrong to touch it, but they had no choice. The docking hatch opened with a soft hiss, and they stepped out onto the warship's outer hull. As soon as their boots hit the surface, an unsettling vibration filled the air, as if the ship had sensed their presence. Drake looked around, feeling the weight of the moment. This was history, something no human had ever seen before, and yet it felt like the beginning of something far more dangerous. "Stay alert," Drake whispered to the team, his voice barely audible over the hum of the ship's strange energy. They moved slowly, scanning their surroundings. The ship's outer corridors were dark, save for the faint glow of the markings on the walls. They seemed to pulse with a life of their own, shifting and changing as if responding to their presence. Entered the ship's core, and the atmosphere shifted. The air grew colder, and a sense of foreboding washed over them. Suddenly, the warship's dormant AI systems activated. A voice deep and mechanical echoed through the dark corridors. "Warning! Hostiles detected. Prepare for battle." The voice was chilling, but more so was the message. Hostiles? There was nothing here, nothing human. They had only just arrived. The voice repeated itself, the words echoing in their minds. "Did we just trigger something?" Mason asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Drake answered, his hand gripping his weapon tighter. "But we need to find out." As they moved deeper into the ship, the true scope of the situation became clearer. This was no ordinary warship. It was designed for something far beyond humanity's understanding, far beyond anything they had ever encountered. But what was it meant for? And why was it now waking up after all these centuries? Before Drake could answer his own questions, the ship's internal lights flickered on, revealing the heart of the warship. In the center of the massive room stood an ancient control panel, its surface covered in more glowing symbols. It was calling to them, pulling them closer. "Captain." "This is it," Mason said, eyes wide with excitement. "This is what we've been searching for." Drake's heart raced as he stepped forward, ready to unlock the secrets of the ship. But as he reached out to touch the control panel, a blinding flash of light filled the room, and the ship's voice echoed again, this time louder and more urgent. "Humanity's darkest nightmare approaches. The battle begins now." The words sent a chill down Drake's spine. Whatever they had unleashed, it was more than just a warship. It was a harbinger of something far worse. And now it was up to humanity to face whatever was coming. The galaxy's fate rested in their hands. The discovery of the ancient warship, now dubbed the Awakening, had sent ripples throughout the galaxy. News of its emergence spread like wildfire, sparking immediate reactions from every corner of known space. The warship, believed to be an Anpuvi, artifact of a long-lost human civilization, was not just an old relic. It was a weapon of unimaginable power, far more advanced than any technology the galaxy's factions had at their disposal. Captain Marcus Drake sat in the briefing room aboard Odyssey, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy that spread out before him. The calm blue of Earth was a distant memory as the tensions between human and alien factions began to escalate. The warship's awakening had disrupted the balance of power in the galaxy, and humanity's place within it was now uncertain. "We're not just dealing with a ship," Lieutenant Sarah Mason said, her voice tense as she stood at the table. "This isn't just some artifact. It's a symbol, a signal. And it's one that every major faction in the galaxy is going to try to claim." Drake didn't need to be told twice. He could feel the weight of the situation. Humanity, once a small, humble species that had just begun to spread its wings among the stars, was now thrust into a game of galactic politics and warfare, one that they had never been prepared for. "The question now," Mason continued, "is how to play the game. Do we keep this ship under control, or do we risk giving it to one of these alien factions?" Drake rubbed his chin thoughtfully. He could already imagine the endless debates that would ensue back on Earth's Central Command. There were no clear answers, only a series of risks. But humanity had come so far, and they weren't going to let anyone else decide their fate. "We won't give it to anyone," Drake said finally, his tone firm. "We need to hold on to it. The power we've unlocked is too great to fall into the wrong hands. It's not just about humanity's survival anymore. It's about the entire galaxy." But deep down, Drake knew it wasn't that simple. The ship was not just a powerful weapon. It was also a ticking time bomb. The AI system embedded inside which had awakened upon their arrival, was designed to protect humanity, but it did so in a way that no one could truly understand. There was no instruction manual for this kind of technology. Every command they issued to the ship felt like they were waking it up even more, unlocking new layers of power and mystery that were perhaps best left untouched. Across the galaxy, the political fallout was already beginning. The Krath, a powerful alien species with a reputation for ruthless conquest, had issued a statement claiming that the ship rightfully belonged to them. They called humanity's discovery an act of provocation. Their warships, massive and terrifying, now patrolled the outer rim of the galaxy, their ominous presence a constant reminder of their intentions. Meanwhile, the Xylothians, another powerful species with highly advanced biotechnology, sent emissaries to Earth, seeking diplomatic relations. They made no secret of their interest in the warship, though they offered no concrete terms. Their motives remained shrouded in mystery, and Drake could feel the unease growing in the pit of his stomach. The Xylothians were known for their subterfuge, and their smile rarely meant goodwill. Back on Earth, there was little time for diplomacy. The global leadership had already begun to fracture. Some factions argued that humanity should unite behind the discovery, using it as leverage to elevate Earth's standing in the galaxy. Others feared that the warship's power would only bring destruction, advocating for a much more cautious approach. But even in the face of all this uncertainty, one thing was clear: humanity was not going to relinquish its newfound power. "Sir, we've received a transmission from the Krath," Mason interrupted, her voice urgent. "They want to talk." Drake straightened in his chair, his mind already working through the potential outcomes. A conversation with the Krath could go one of two ways: either it would end in an alliance, or it would be the beginning of a war. The galaxy wasn't prepared for another full-scale conflict, but it seemed like that was exactly what was on the horizon. "Put it through," Drake ordered. Holographic screen flickered to life, revealing a towering Krath ambassador. His green, chitinous skin gleamed in the dim light of his ship's command center, his face a twisted mixture of human-like and insectoid features. His deep-set eyes glowed with a faint, unsettling red hue. "Captain Drake," the ambassador's voice rumbled, its tone thick with both authority and a hint of amusement. "We, the Krath, demand that the ship you have discovered be turned over to us. It is a weapon of ancient origins, and we—" Drake interrupted, his patience wearing thin. "I'm sorry, Ambassador, but that ship is not for you to claim. Humanity discovered it, and we intend to keep it." The Krath ambassador's eyes narrowed, and the atmosphere in the room thickened with tension. "You do not understand the power you are dealing with. That ship belongs to us, and your kind is not fit to wield such force. Do not make the mistake of defying the Krath." The ambassador's threat hung in the air like a sword ready to drop. But Drake wasn't about to back down. He met the Krath ambassador's gaze with unwavering resolve. "You may think you can intimidate us, Ambassador, but you're wrong," Drake said, his voice calm but firm. "We are not afraid of your threats. Humanity has no intention of handing over the ship. If you want it, you'll have to take it from us." The ambassador's expression twisted into a grimace. "Very well, Captain. You've made your choice. The Krath will not forget this." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the room thick with the weight of the looming threat. Mason looked at Drake, her face a mixture of disbelief and fear. "They've declared war," she said softly. "Not yet," Drake replied, though his voice betrayed a hint of doubt. "But it's coming." Elsewhere in the galaxy, the Xylothians were not idle. Their emissaries, who had initially offered diplomacy, had now begun to show their true colors. The truth was, they had always seen humanity as a potential threat, one to be controlled or neutralized. They had watched as the Krath made their move, and they knew that the time was coming for them to act as well. Small fleet of Xylothian ships appeared just outside the orbit of Earth's moon. Their sleek, biomechanical ships shimmered in the light, a constant reminder of the advanced biotechnologies they wielded. They weren't here for diplomacy anymore. They were here to make a statement. Back on Earth, the government scrambled to respond. Diplomatic channels were flooded with messages from both the Krath and the Xylothians, and the pressure was building. As the situation grew increasingly dire, Drake knew there was no turning back. "We need to act fast," Drake said, standing up and pacing in front of the holographic map. "We need to send a message, one that shows humanity will not be bullied by these alien factions." Mason nodded. "But how? They outnumber us, and their technology is far more advanced." "We have one advantage," Drake said with a grim smile. "The Warship. It's humanity's greatest weapon, and it's on our side." But even as Drake spoke those words, a part of him knew that the Warship wasn't just a tool. It was a symbol of something much larger, something that could either unite humanity or destroy it. The galaxy was in chaos, and humanity was right at the center of it. The future of all life in the universe rested on a razor's edge, and Drake was about to make a decision that would either save or condemn them all. Humanity's greatest secret was now out in the galaxy. The Warship, an ancient and seemingly indestructible relic of a forgotten era, had been discovered, and the power within it was slowly starting to reveal itself. The crew aboard the Odyssey was still reeling from the discovery. But one thing was clear: humanity now stood at the precipice of something far bigger than they had ever imagined. The Warship was not only a symbol of their advancement, but a tool of unimaginable destruction. As the days passed, the crew worked tirelessly to unlock more of the Warship systems. Every layer of its technology seemed more complex, more alien than the last. At first, the crew had been cautious, unsure of what they were dealing with. But now they were on the verge of something greater, something that could potentially change the entire balance of power in the galaxy. And as they pushed forward, they began to realize that the ship's AI, once dormant, was becoming more and more interactive, more attuned to the human presence aboard. Captain Marcus Drake stood in the ship's central control room, his hands resting on the cold metal surface of the command console. The holographic display flickered to life, the ship's AI interface blinking as it processed the latest commands. For the first time, it seemed to acknowledge Drake's presence in a way it hadn't before. The ship's voice came through, cold, yet somehow filled with a faint sense of recognition. "Captain Drake, I have analyzed your species' potential," the ship's voice boomed, its tone deep and resonant. "I have determined that humanity possesses the necessary will to wield this power, but you must prove worthy." Drake felt a chill run down his spine. The ship was not just a weapon, it was a judge, a jury, and an executioner. It would not simply hand over its power. Humanity would have to prove itself worthy to command it. The question, however, was, what would constitute worthiness? Worthy of what? Drake asked, his voice steady despite the unease rising in his chest. "What exactly do you mean?" "Worthy to wield the ultimate force," the ship replied, its voice now tinged with something almost like amusement. "Humanity must first pass through the trial of ascension. Only then can the full potential of the Warship be unlocked." Drake exchanged a quick glance with Lieutenant Sarah Mason, who was standing nearby. She raised an eyebrow, but neither of them spoke. The trial of ascension sounded like something out of an ancient legend. Was this really the key to unlocking the Warship's full capabilities? Or was it just another dangerous game? "What is the trial of ascension?" Mason finally asked, her voice cautious. The ship's interface flared, showing a holographic projection of the galaxy. A series of blinking lights appeared on the map, each one indicating a different star system. The ship's AI explained that the trial was a series of tests, each designed to evaluate humanity's readiness. The crew was to travel to each system, completing challenges that would push them to their limits. "Your species must prove that you are capable of controlling such power," the ship explained. "If you fail, humanity will not be worthy of the warship's capabilities, and it will be sealed forever. Drake's mind raced as he processed the information. This wasn't just about military might. It was a test of everything humanity stood for: their resolve, their ingenuity, their unity. The stakes couldn't be higher. "We accept," Drake said, his voice firm. "We'll prove we're worthy." As the crew prepared for the first trial, the rest of the galaxy continued to watch and wait. The Krath, the Xylothians, and every other faction in the galaxy knew about the warship's awakening by now. The warship's power was no secret, and they all had their eyes on humanity. Far from Earth, in the shadow of distant stars, the Krath began to mobilize. They had their own ancient relics, and their fleet was massive. The threat of war loomed larger by the day, but the Krath were patient. They knew the warship's trials would test humanity in ways they couldn't predict. They would wait and see if humanity would fail. And if humanity did, the Krath would be ready to strike, to claim the warship for themselves. The Xylothians, too, were preparing. Their emissaries had returned to their homeworld, bringing with them the knowledge of the warship and its potential. While the Xylothians had tried to maintain an air of diplomacy, they had never truly been interested in peace. Their goal was clear. They intended to control the warship's power, to bend it to their will. But even with the galaxy's attention, the crew of the Odyssey pressed forward. The first trial was approaching, and they needed to be ready. Each member of the crew had their own role to play in the test. The ship's AI had provided them with all the information they needed, but that didn't mean the challenge would be easy. The first trial would take them to the edge of a star system, where an ancient enemy awaited, an enemy humanity had never encountered. As the Odyssey approached the designated coordinates, a sudden tremor ran through the ship, and the lights flickered. "What was that?" Mason asked, glancing up at the control panels. "Something's interfering with the ship's systems," Drake muttered, tapping a few commands into the console. The readings on the screen were a mess, and it didn't take long for him to realize that they weren't alone. Something had come through the warp gate with them. Suddenly, a massive shadow loomed outside the windows. A ship, no, a fleet appeared, its dark, menacing silhouette blocking out the stars. This was no ordinary fleet. The designs were ancient, alien, and yet somehow familiar. The warship's AI had prepared them for this. The first test was to confront a long-lost race, one that had been thought extinct for centuries. The voice of the ship's AI echoed through the control room again. "Warning. You are being targeted by the Ethelians. They are the first trial. Prepare for combat." The Ethelians were an ancient race of beings who had once been the rulers of the galaxy. But they had disappeared long ago, their empire crumbling into dust. Or so the legends said. Now it seemed they were back, and they had a score to settle with humanity. "Brace for impact," Drake ordered as the Odyssey rocketed forward, its engines pushing them into a series of evasive maneuvers. The Ethelians' fleet opened fire, massive energy blasts streaking toward them. The ship shook violently as the first wave of fire slammed into the shields, but the Odyssey held strong. "We're not going down that easy," Mason shouted, firing back at the enemy fleet with the warship's weapons. The energy beams lit up the darkness of space as the two forces clashed, the outcome uncertain. Humanity's first test had begun, and the stakes were higher than they had ever imagined. The Ethelians' ships were massive, their weaponry capable of disabling entire fleets in a single strike. But the Odyssey was no ordinary ship. The warship's weapon systems were unlike anything the crew had ever seen, and as they engaged the Ethelians in combat, they realized just how much power they had at their fingertips. Every shot, every maneuver, seemed to have a purpose, as though the ship itself was guiding them. It was clear. Humanity had never fought an enemy like this, but the warship's power was real, and it was becoming more evident with every passing moment. The battle raged on, the crew fighting for their survival as the Ethelians closed in. With every blast, every near miss, the crew grew stronger, more determined. This was not just about the ship, it was about proving humanity's place in the galaxy. And as they fought, Drake knew that this was just the beginning. The warships. Power had only just begun to reveal itself, and with it came an understanding. Humanity had the potential to change the fate of the galaxy, or to destroy it. The war was far from over, but for the first time, humanity had a fighting chance. The cold emptiness of space stretched before them as the Odyssey and the ancient fleet of Ethelians drifted into a deadly stalemate. After hours of brutal combat, both sides had suffered heavy losses, but neither was willing to back down. The tension was thick, and the crew of humanity's warship had no choice but to press forward, with every second bringing them closer to the inevitable clash that would determine the galaxy's fate. Captain Marcus Drake stood at the helm of the Odyssey, his face hard with determination. His hands gripped the control panel as the crew worked feverishly to regain control of the ship's energy systems. The ship's AI, which had once been a mysterious force, was now an essential ally in their battle for survival. It guided them through the chaos, helping to recalibrate their weapons and shields. The massive Ethelians' fleet was now scattered across the system, but their formidable presence still loomed in the distance. "We're barely holding together, Captain, Lieutenant," Sarah Mason reported, her voice tight with worry. "The energy systems are running on overdrive. If we don't get things under control soon, we won't be able to sustain the fight." Drake turned, his eyes scanning the faces of his crew. They were exhausted, their nerves frayed, but they weren't giving up, not now. Not after everything they had fought for. "How long can we keep up this pace?" Drake asked, his voice calm but urgent. Mason hesitated for a moment, her fingers flying over the console. "A few more minutes, Captain. After that, we're on our own." Drake nodded, his mind racing. They had to finish this battle. They had to prove that humanity was capable of wielding the power of the warship, and if they didn't, the consequences would be catastrophic. The Ethelians, long thought extinct, were a living reminder that humanity wasn't the only species with ancient, powerful technology. They were more than capable of taking down humanity's forces if they couldn't adapt quickly. "Prepare the crew for another offensive," Drake said, stepping away from the helm. "We're going to push through. Mason, reroute all available power to weapons. I want to hit them hard." "Yes, Captain," she replied, turning back to her station with renewed focus. Drake looked at the forward view screen, his eyes narrowing as the Ethelian ships began to regroup. The enemy had suffered losses, but their fleet was still formidable. The warship's energy weapons, capable of obliterating entire squadrons in a single shot, had been effective, but not enough. The Ethelians had the edge in raw numbers and the advantage of years, if not centuries, of experience. "Captain, incoming communication from the Ethelians," the communications officer, Lieutenant Frank O'Connor, reported, his voice laced with uncertainty. "Put it through," Drake ordered, his fingers tight on the armrest of his seat. The hologram of a towering Ethelians officer appeared, its insectoid features looming large. The image was static, cold, and unfeeling. The Ethelians were known for their ruthlessness, but this one seemed almost amused, its glowing red eyes flickering like distant stars. "This battle has gone on long enough, Captain Drake," the Ethelians officer said, its voice distorted but filled with a deep, gravelly tone. "Your resistance is futile. Surrender the warship now, and we will grant you a quick death. Refuse, and we will destroy your species, just as we did to countless others." Drake's face remained stoic as the Ethelians officer finished its message. The threat hung heavy in the air, but it wasn't enough to break his resolve. He had fought too hard, and humanity had come too far to bow to alien threats. "We're not backing down," Drake said, his voice steady. "We're fighting for humanity's future. Prepare yourself." The communication cut off abruptly, leaving only the faint hum of the warship's engines in the background. Drake looked at his crew, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and determination. The Ethelians had threatened them before, but now, the time had come for humanity to show that they were not going to be so easily intimidated. "Load all weapons," Drake said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "We end this now." The crew scrambled into action, preparing for the next wave of combat. The warship's massive cannons recharged, their energy humming as the massive vessel aligned itself with the remaining Ethelians' fleet. Drake's mind raced through the strategy. They had to hit hard and fast, with no room for hesitation. If they let the Ethelians regroup, they risked losing everything. The warship's energy reserves were low, and they couldn't afford a prolonged battle. A few moments later, the Odyssey unleashed its full power. Energy beams, bright enough to outshine the stars, erupted from the ship's cannons, tearing through the vacuum of space. The Ethelians responded, launching their own deadly assault. But the Odyssey was faster, more agile. Their blasts connected with the Ethelians' ships, disintegrating them in flashes of bright light. The massive fleet began to splinter, pieces of ships breaking apart and drifting into the void. But the Ethelians were far from finished. From the debris, a smaller but heavily armed ship emerged, charging directly toward the Odyssey. It was an enemy ace, one of the most feared ships in the galaxy. The Ethelians had sent their best fighter, knowing it would take everything the Odyssey had to survive. "Brace for impact," Mason shouted, her fingers flying over the controls. The Odyssey shuddered as the enemy ace collided with the ship's shields. The force of the impact rattled the crew, but the warship held strong. Drake's heart raced as he realized that this battle would be the defining moment in humanity's struggle for survival. "Deploy all fighters," Drake commanded. "We need backup." A squadron of human starfighters launched from the Odyssey, their engines roaring as they sped toward the enemy ace. The battle was now a full-scale conflict, with ships darting through space, exchanging fire at impossible speeds. The Odyssey remained in the center, a beacon of human defiance in the midst of a galactic storm. Inside the command room, the tension was unbearable. The crew could hear the sounds of explosions through the ship's hull, the deafening noise of weapons fire echoing from every direction. But Drake remained focused. He had one goal: to protect humanity's future. With each shot fired, with every evasive maneuver, they were proving that humanity was capable of facing the darkest forces in the galaxy. Then, in the chaos, something unexpected happened. The Ethelians' A-ship made a desperate move, a maneuver that sent it hurtling toward the Odyssey with lethal force. Drake knew they couldn't dodge it. It was now or never. "Captain, we have to move," Mason yelled. Drake didn't hesitate. "All power to shields. Brace for impact." But before the enemy ship could strike, the warship's AI intervened. Its voice came through, clear and urgent. "Humanity must decide. Use the warship's ultimate weapon." Drake's heart skipped a beat. He had heard rumors about the warship's ultimate weapon, but he didn't know if they could control it. The weapon's destructive power was said to be beyond anything anyone had ever seen. It could destroy entire planets with a single shot, but at what cost? Mason looked at Drake, her eyes wide with fear. "Captain, if we use that weapon, there's no going back." "We don't have a choice," Drake said, his voice determined. "We end this now." The AI responded instantly, rerouting all power to the warship's core. The hum of energy grew deafening, and the ship's cannons began to glow with an intensity that made the crew's skin crawl. In a single thunderous blast, the warship fired its ultimate weapon. The beam of energy tore through space like a spear, annihilating the enemy ace and sending shockwaves through the remaining Ethelians' fleet. Their ships shattered like glass under the sheer force of the blast, disintegrating into dust before they could even react. The battle was over. The Ethelians had been defeated, but humanity had paid a heavy price. The Odyssey had used its ultimate weapon, and with it came the realization that humanity had crossed a line. The power of the warship was unlike anything they had ever imagined, and now there was no turning back. Drake stood silent as he looked out at the wreckage of the Ethelians' fleet, his mind racing with the enormity of what had just transpired. Humanity had won the battle, but at what cost? One thing was clear: this was just the beginning. The victory over the Ethelians was still fresh in the air, as Captain Marcus Drake and his crew found themselves facing a new, more complex set of challenges. Humanity had proven itself in battle, but the consequences of their success were already becoming apparent. The warship's ultimate weapon had shown just how far they were willing to go to protect Earth, but the galaxy was not a forgiving place. With every victory, the cost of war grew heavier. As the Odyssey drifted through the void of space, the crew had little time to celebrate. The remnants of the Ethelians' fleet had been wiped out, but the galaxy was watching. And the factions that once held their ground now saw humanity not as a fledgling species, but as a force that could tip the balance of power. Captain Drake stood in the command room, his eyes fixed on the holographic map of the galaxy. The Krath were still lurking on the fringes of the known universe, their fleets growing stronger. The Zelothians, ever enigmatic, had been silent after their initial diplomatic overtures. But the tension in the air was undeniable. A storm was brewing. "Captain," Mason's voice interrupted his thoughts, and Drake turned to face her. "We've just received a transmission from the Zelothians. They want to meet." Drake's brow furrowed. The Zelothians were known for their vast biological knowledge, manipulating genetics and using biotechnology in ways humanity had yet to understand. Their interest in the warship was clear, but their true intentions remained shrouded in mystery. "We don't have the luxury of making enemies, not right now," Drake said, running a hand through his hair. "Set up the meeting. Let's see what they have to say." Moments later, the holographic image of a Zylothian diplomat materialized before him. The figure was humanoid in appearance, but carried an unsettling air. The skin was smooth and gleaming, with an almost organic glow to it. The Zelothian's eyes were large, reflective, and unnervingly calm, giving away little of what lay behind them. "Captain Drake," the Zylothian diplomat began, its voice smooth and musical. "We come in peace, for now." Drake kept his face neutral. He had learned long ago not to trust the smooth words of an alien species. The Zelothians had a reputation for diplomacy, but it was always laced with a darker motive. He had no illusions about their intentions. "I'm listening," Drake replied, his tone firm. "We have watched humanity's actions closely." "Captain," the Zylothian diplomat continued, "your discovery of the warship, and the way you've used its power, has caught our attention. You have done what many would have thought impossible, striking down the Ethelians, a race as old as time itself." Drake didn't flinch. "And what is it you want from us?" The Zylothian's smile remained unchanged, but the glint in their eyes spoke volumes. "What we want is simple: your allegiance. The warship in your hands could be the key to reshaping this galaxy. And we, the Zelothians, believe that the future of this galaxy should belong to those who can control such power. If humanity joins US, we can offer you more than just protection. We can offer you knowledge, resources, and a place among the galaxy's most powerful." Drake's stomach twisted. The Zylothians were not offering an alliance. They were offering subjugation, and they were clever enough to disguise it as an opportunity. It was a tempting offer, but it came at a cost: humanity's autonomy. "We don't bow to anyone," Drake said coldly, "and we don't join anyone's empire." The Zylothian diplomat's face remained unreadable, but there was a subtle shift in its posture. "Understand this, Captain," it said slowly. "You may think you are in control now, but the galaxy has a way of correcting such imbalances. You are not alone in your ambitions. And if you stand against us, you will have made an enemy of not just the Zelothians, but every faction that seeks the power of the Warship." The diplomat paused, letting the words sink in. "You may have won this battle, but the war is just beginning. Join us, and you will have the strength to stand against all who oppose you. Refuse, and you will face an enemy far greater than the Ethelians." Drake didn't respond immediately. He felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The Zelothians were powerful, but the more he considered their offer, the more he realized that joining them would be the end of humanity's freedom. The Warship could change everything, but at what cost? "Thanks, but no thanks," Drake finally sighed, his voice resolute. "We won't be anyone's pawn." The Zilothian diplomat's expression did not change, but Drake could feel the undercurrent of hostility in the words that followed. "We'll see how long that confidence lasts. Captain, there are forces in this galaxy that you have yet to comprehend. We'll be watching, and we'll be ready." The transmission ended, and for a moment, silence filled the command room. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The Zilothians had been clear. They would not forget this. But humanity had made its choice. Prepare for the worst, Drake said grimly, his mind already calculating their next moves. "We've just made enemies of the most powerful species in the galaxy." The crew went to work, knowing that the Warship had given them the upper hand, but that would be short-lived if they didn't act quickly. The Zilothians would come for them. The Krath would come for them. And even if they managed to hold their ground, more factions would rise up, each eager to claim the Warship as their own. Drake turned to Mason, who was already working at her station. "What's the status on the Warship?" he asked. "We're still gathering intel on its full capabilities," Mason replied, her voice focused. "But there's one thing we know for sure. It's a weapon beyond anything we've ever seen. If we use it recklessly, it could destroy everything, including us." Drake clenched his fists. The Warship was their greatest asset and their greatest danger. The Zilothians and the Krath were just the beginning. There were others out there, waiting to strike, and the moment humanity dropped its guard, they would be overwhelmed. "I don't want to use the Warship's power unless we absolutely have to," Drake said, his voice steady. "But if the galaxy forces our hand, we won't hesitate." A moment of silence passed as the weight of his words settled on the crew. The Odyssey was their home, their shield, their weapon. But it was also their only hope. Humanity had no allies, no friends in this galaxy. They had to fight alone. "Captain," Mason began, her voice soft but certain, "we may not have a choice. In this, if the Zilothians are right about one thing, the galaxy won't leave us alone. Sooner or later, they'll come for us. And when they do, we have to be ready." Drake nodded slowly. He had known this from the moment they had unlocked the Warship's power. They were on the precipice of something much bigger than themselves. And they had no idea how deep the abyss went. "We will be ready," he said finally. "And if the galaxy thinks they can stop us, they've got another thing coming." The crew returned to their stations, the hum of the Warship's engines and the soft chatter of communication filling the air. Drake felt the weight of the decision on his shoulders, but he didn't allow it to show. Humanity had made its choice, and now they would have to live with the consequences. But as the Odyssey drifted deeper into the unknown, one thing was certain: the galaxy would never be the same again. The Dark Alliance with the Zilothians had been rejected, but at what cost? The battle for the Warship was just beginning, and the true test of humanity's strength had yet to unfold. The journey through the galaxy had taken a toll on Captain Marcus Drake and the crew of the Odyssey. The battles, the endless decisions, the weight of knowing that humanity's survival was tied to a weapon they barely understood, all of it had started to wear them down. They had refused the Zilothians' offer and fought off the Ethelians, but a greater danger loomed. They had no idea what the final trial would entail, but the Warship's AI had made one thing clear: The last secret of the warship was about to be revealed. Days had passed since their encounter with the Xylothians, and tensions were running high. Drake stood in the command room, his eyes scanning the ship's various readouts. The warship had grown more active, its AI now constantly interacting with the crew. But the more they unlocked, the more questions arose. The ship had a mind of its own, and humanity had only scratched the surface of its true potential. Mason, her face pale from exhaustion, approached Drake. "Captain, we've reached the coordinates for the final trial. The ship's systems are stabilizing, but it's clear the final test won't be easy." "Tell me about it," Drake muttered, rubbing his eyes. The exhaustion had taken its toll on him too, but there was no time for rest. "What's the situation with the ship's AI? Any new updates?" Mason hesitated before answering. "The AI is different now. It's more responsive, but it feels like it's pushing us towards something. It's as if it's waiting for us to take the next step. We need to be careful. This last trial, it's not just about fighting or proving our strength. It feels like it's testing something deeper." Drake frowned. The eye had always been enigmatic, but now it felt as though it was guiding them towards something far beyond the warship's weapons. He couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that the trial would push humanity to its limits, mentally, emotionally, and morally. "We'll proceed with caution," Drake said, his voice firm. "We've come this far. We're not turning back now." The Odyssey made its final jump through the warp gate, emerging into a desolate part of space where the stars seemed to fade into nothingness. It was as though they had entered a void, a place where time and space no longer made sense. Ahead of them was a massive structure, an ancient floating temple, its shape vaguely familiar but impossibly large. This was the final trial, and whatever awaited them inside could change everything. As they approached the temple, the warship's AI spoke again, its voice now more insistent. "Prepare for the final trial. The test begins now. The outcome will determine humanity's fate." Drake took a deep breath. The crew had already faced unimaginable challenges, but this was something entirely different. As the Odyssey docked near the temple's exterior, they could feel the immense weight of the moment. "Everyone, stay sharp," Drake ordered. "We don't know what we're walking into." The crew suited up, their weapons at the ready as they boarded the shuttle and made their way toward the temple. The atmosphere inside the structure was unnerving cold, dark, and filled with an eerie hum. The walls seemed to pulse with an energy that couldn't be explained, and the air was thick with a sense of foreboding. "We're not alone," Mason whispered as they moved deeper into the temple's vast corridors. Drake nodded, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The walls were covered with strange glowing symbols, some of which flickered in and out of existence. The closer they got to the heart of the temple, the more the feeling of unease grew. The warship's AI had been cryptic about what they would face here, but it was clear now that the trial wasn't just about a fight. It was something much more insidious. They reached the central chamber, and what they found there sent a chill down their spines. At the center of the room was a massive ancient machine, its surface covered in intricate designs and alien runes. It looked like a console, but there was something wrong about it, something that didn't sit right with the crew. "This is it," Mason said, stepping forward cautiously. "This is what we've been searching for." But before she could touch the console, the ship's AI spoke again, its voice dark and foreboding. "Humanity must decide. To wield the power of the warship, you must sacrifice what you hold most. Dear, this is the final test. The ship's power will be yours, but it will come at a cost." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, the room fell silent. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to make of the IS statement. Sacrifice. What did it mean? The power of the warship was unimaginable, but what price would they have to pay to claim it? "Captain," Mason said, her voice trembling, "what does it mean? What is it asking us to do?" Drake took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had fought for humanity's survival at every turn, but this was different. This wasn't a battle against an enemy, it was a test of their very humanity. The warship's AI was offering them something no one had ever dreamed of, but at a cost that could destroy everything they had fought for. "I don't know," Drake admitted, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. "But we have no choice. We have to see this through." As he stepped forward toward the console, the machine came to life. A brilliant light flashed from its core, and the symbols on the walls began to glow brighter. The room seemed to warp and shift, and Drake felt his senses momentarily disoriented. The voice of the I spoke again, but this time it wasn't just a voice. It was a presence filling the room with its immense power. The test is simple. To gain control of the warship, humanity must offer its greatest sacrifice. A life must be given, a soul must be lost, and only then will you be able to unlock the full potential of the ship. Choose wisely, for once the decision is made, there is no turning back. Drake's heart pounded in his chest as the gravity of the decision hit him. A life must be given? Sacrifice? He looked at the crew around him. They were all part of this mission, all part of the fight for humanity's future. Could he ask any of them to give up their life for the warship? Could any of them do it willingly? Mason's voice broke through his thoughts. "Captain, what if we don't? What if we walk away from this? What if we reject the warship's power?" The ice voice echoed again, louder this time, as if it had anticipated this question. "Reject the warship, and humanity's fate will be sealed. Without this power, you will be nothing but prey to the forces that seek to destroy you. There will be no future for your species." Drake closed his eyes, his mind swirling with conflicting thoughts. He knew the warship was humanity's only chance at survival, but at what cost? Would one life be enough to pay for the salvation of billions? Was the future of the human race worth sacrificing a single individual's life? I don't know what to do," Drake muttered, his voice shaky with uncertainty. Mason stepped forward, her eyes locked onto the console. "Captain, I'll do it." Drake's eyes shot open, his heart racing. "No, Mason, you don't understand." "I can't. I understand, Captain," she interrupted, her voice steady. "We've all made sacrifices. We've all put everything on the line for humanity's future. This is just one more step. I can do this." Drake wanted to protest, wanted to stop her, but he knew she was right. Mason had always been one of the strongest members of the crew. She had led countless operations, never once hesitating when it came to the mission. If anyone could make this sacrifice, it was her, Mason. Drake's voice faltered as he stepped closer to her. "You don't have to do this. There has to be another way." But Mason just smiled softly, her eyes filled with determination. "There is no other way, Captain. This is what we've been fighting for. Humanity's survival, our future." And with that, Mason stepped forward, her hand reaching out toward the console. The light from the machine flared, and a beam of energy shot toward her, enveloping her in a blinding light. Drake tried to call out, but the words caught in his throat. He watched as Mason's form flickered and then disappeared entirely. Her sacrifice complete, the warship's power surged through the room, and the AI's voice echoed one final time. "Humanity has passed the final trial. The warship's power is yours to wield, but remember, every victory has a cost. The galaxy will never be the same." As the light faded and the room returned to its former state, Drake collapsed to his knees. The warship's full potential was now unlocked, but at what cost? Humanity had won the power to shape its own destiny, but it had lost something far greater in the process. And as Drake stood in the silence of the temple, the weight of Mason's sacrifice heavy on his heart, one thing was clear: the galaxy would never be the same. The moment Captain Marcus Drake and his crew had feared had come. The warship's final secret had been unlocked, but the cost was steep. Lieutenant Sarah Mason, one of the brightest and most steadfast members of the Odyssey crew, had made the ultimate sacrifice for humanity's future. The ship now pulsed with power, its full potential at their fingertips, but they were left with a heavy weight in their hearts. The crew gathered in the command room, the silence among them palpable. The warship's systems hummed softly, a constant reminder of the raw power now at their disposal. The galaxy, already trembling with fear and anticipation, would soon know what humanity could do. But it had come at a cost a life had been given. And with it, a part of their humanity lost. Drake stood at the front of the room, staring out into the void of space. The temple they had left behind was now a distant memory, but the power it had granted them would remain. He clenched his fists, still struggling to come to terms with Mason's sacrifice. Mason didn't deserve this, he muttered under his breath, his voice low, heavy with grief. None of us deserve this, Captain, Lieutenant Frank O'Connor said from behind him. He had been quiet for the last few hours, his mind clearly racing, but now his voice was steady. But it's what we've got. We can't let her sacrifice go to waste. We need to finish this. Drake turned slowly to face his crew. They were all there. Each of them had been part of the journey, had fought alongside him through thick and thin. And now they stood on the edge of a galaxy, teetering on the brink of war, with every faction eager to claim the power they had just unlocked. We've made enemies, and we've earned allies, Drake began, his voice more controlled now. But what matters now is what we do with this power. We've come too far to turn back. The Krath, the Xylothians, they think they can use us. But we are in control now, and we need to make sure they know that. O'Connor nodded. The Xylothians still haven't responded to our rejection of their offer. And the Krath are on the move. They're amassing their forces in the outer rim, likely preparing for a full-scale assault. Drake took a deep breath. The Krath were always going to come for us. But now we have the means to fight back. I've seen what this warship can do. I've seen the power of the weapon systems, the way it can move through space. But we've never faced an enemy like this before. Not one that can bring the galaxy to its knees. The crew exchanged glances. They had been through a lot, but the war had always seemed distant, a reality that was somewhere out there, something to prepare for. But now it was here. Captain, Mason's voice suddenly echoed through the comm system. It was her voice, but there was something different about it. It wasn't just a memory of the past. It was as if she were still with them, guiding them. Captain, you have unlocked the warship's true power. But remember, with this power comes responsibility, the eye of the warship said, taking over the comms. It had become more than just a voice, more than just a system. It had taken on a life of its own, shaped by humanity's actions. The galaxy will not forgive your actions lightly. The Krath and the Xylothians will not relent. They will come for you, and you must decide. Will you be humanity's shield, or will you become the galaxy's downfall? The crew was silent. Every word from the AI carried a weight that made their decision all the more impossible. We've been given the power to change the course of history, Drake said, standing tall. But we have to decide what kind of future we want. We don't have to conquer the galaxy, but we cannot stand idly by. Humanity will not be ruled by anyone, the crew nodded. They had a common goal now, to survive, to protect Earth, and to ensure that Mason's sacrifice had meaning. But how they did that, how they wielded this new power would shape the future of the galaxy. Captain, I'm picking up multiple ships on the sensors, O'Connor called from his station. They're Krath vessels, and there are more coming from the Xylothian sector. The Krath have launched their assault. Drake's heart tightened. How many? At least 20 ships, O'Connor replied. But there's more behind them. The Xylothians haven't made their move yet, but we can't ignore them. The tension in the room mounted as they realized the war was no longer a matter of defense. The battle was upon them. Get the warship ready, Drake ordered, his voice firm. Prepare to engage the Krath. We're not just defending Earth anymore. We're fighting for humanity's place in this galaxy." The crew sprang into action, working in sync as they prepared for the battle. The Odyssey had never been in a fight like this before, but now they had the upper hand. The warship's weapons were unlike anything the Krath had ever faced, and they would be forced to realize that humanity was no longer weak. As the Krath fleet grew closer, the Odyssey powered up its weapons. The ship hummed with raw energy, and its cannons glowed bright, ready to unleash their fury. But as the crew prepared for the first strike, Drake felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. Would their newfound power be enough? Could they truly stand against the forces of the galaxy? The Krath fleet arrived in full force. Their ships were massive, their design brutal, and their weapons nearly unstoppable. But they had never faced an enemy like the Odyssey before. As the two fleets collided in the cold expanse of space, the Odyssey moved with unimaginable speed, its energy blasts tearing through the darkness. "Target their lead ship," Drake ordered. "Hit them with everything we've got." The Odyssey responded, its weapons charging and unleashing a devastating beam of energy that ripped through the Krath flagship. The explosion lit up the void like a supernova, and the Krath fleet faltered. But they were far from defeated. The remaining Krath ships retaliated, firing a barrage of missiles and energy blasts toward the Odyssey. The warship shields flared with the impact, but they held. The Krath had underestimated humanity's resolve and the power of the warship. As Drake watched the battle unfold, he realized just how far they had come. The Krath had been the first to challenge humanity, but they would not be the last. The Xylothians would follow soon enough, and the galaxy would never be the same. "Captain, we've got a response from the Xylothians," O'Connor reported. "They've deployed a fleet. They're moving in on our position." "Ready the second wave," Drake ordered. "We won't stop fighting." The Krath fleet was now in disarray, their leadership shattered by the unexpected power of the Odyssey. The Odyssey's cannons fired again, reducing another Krath warship to rubble. But just as victory seemed within their grasp, the Xylothian fleet arrived. Their ships were sleek and terrifying, the cutting edge of bioengineering. They wasted no time engaging the Odyssey, their weapons glowing with deadly precision. "Brace for impact," Mason shouted as the first wave of Xylothian fire struck the Odyssey's shields. "We need to move," O'Connor called. "The Xylothians are pulling back into formation. They're preparing for a massive strike." Drake clenched his jaw. "No, we're not letting them dictate this battle. This is our fight." The warship's systems hummed, and the crew steeled themselves for the final confrontation. With the power of the warship fully unlocked, humanity was in control, but it was a fragile control. Every faction in the galaxy knew that humanity had the ability to change the tide of this war, and they would stop at nothing to ensure that didn't happen. The Xylothian ships fired again, and the Odyssey returned fire with renewed fury. Energy beams and missiles collided in space, lighting up the void with explosions of color and fire. The battle raged on for hours, each side gaining and losing ground. But it was clear humanity wasn't just fighting for its survival anymore. It was fighting for its place among the stars. With one final push, the Odyssey unleashed its most devastating weapon. The beam cut through the heart of the Xylothian fleet, reducing it to ash in a matter of seconds. But even as they watched the final remnants of their enemies disintegrate, Drake knew that this victory was not the end. The galaxy had watched, and it had seen humanity's power, but it had also seen what the cost of that power was. And now, humanity's future hung in the balance. As the Odyssey stood victorious in the aftermath of the battle, Drake's mind turned to what came next. The war was over for now. But the galaxy was still out there, filled with countless enemies, each one waiting for their turn to challenge humanity. Humanity had won this battle, but the true test was yet to come.